Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. You're right. People keep asking why I didn't speak up sooner, why I never told anyone about the guy who kept showing up during my closing shifts at Brewster's Coffee House. The truth is I did tell someone. I told my manager, Diane. She dismissed it, acting like I was just being overly paranoid. It's a coffee shop, sweetie. People buy coffee. But this wasn't about a caffeine fix. Anyone who's worked late night service in a small town knows the clear difference between a normal late night customer and someone who is just watching you. My 23rd birthday had just passed in September. I'd been covering those Thursday and Saturday closings for about 6 months. The pay was good for coastal Maine, and I was trying to save enough for my own place. Sharing a drafty house with 3 roommates off Route 1 wasn't ideal, but it was better than moving back home to Augusta. Brewster's sat on the corner of Harbor Street in Pine. It was one of those charming brick buildings that looks great during the summer tourist rush and totally deserted once October arrives. By Halloween, most of the summer crowd had vanished, and the town felt like it had shrunk in half. The first time he came in was mid-September, maybe 2 weeks after my birthday. It was a Thursday, around 9:45 p.m. Just 15 minutes before closing. We rarely had late night walk-ins, maybe 1 or 2 people quickly grabbing a coffee for the road. He walked in wearing a dark green jacket, the type with excessive pockets, and a low baseball cap. Nothing out of the ordinary there. Plenty of fishermen or construction workers dress like that around here. What got my attention was that he didn't look at the menu. He didn't look at anything except me. He ordered a black coffee, paid with exact change, and sat at the corner table by the window. That spot had a perfect view of the service counter where I was working. I went through my closing routine, wiping down the machine, refilling the pastry case for the morning, counting the cash register. The entire time I could feel his gaze, not a casual look but a solid stare. When I finally looked up, he would turn his head slightly, like a quick movement of someone who'd been caught, but not enough to seem embarrassed. Just enough to let me know he knew I'd noticed. He stayed until 3 p.m. I'd already locked the front door right at closing, and he'd watched me do it. Then he stood up, walked to the door, waited for me to unlock it, and left without a single word. He didn't even throw away his cup. The second time was that Saturday, the exact same routine. Arrived at 9:47 p.m. black coffee, exact change, corner table, the same intense stare. This time I tried to start a conversation thinking I might be overthinking things. Cold out there tonight, huh? He simply nodded. No smile, no reply. Just a nod. His eyes still fixed on me. I felt a knot of tension form in my chest. That feeling you get when a situation isn't dangerous yet, but could quickly turn that way if you make the wrong choice. I texted my roommate Jenna at 9:55 p.m. "Freepy guy is back," she wrote. "Want me to come get you?" I almost said yes, but then I imagined having to explain the situation to Diane, and how silly it would sound. A guy came in for coffee and sat quietly. That's the whole story. So, I texted back, "No, I'm fine. Just venting." He left at 10:05 p.m. that night. I watched him through the window as he walked down Harbor Street toward the marina, hands in his pockets, moving slowly. The streetlights made his shadow stretch out, long and thin behind him. It became a regular pattern. Every Thursday and Saturday for the next month, he'd arrive between 9:45 and 9:50 p.m. Always the same order, the same table, the same stare. I started adjusting my closing duties, trying to stay behind the counter as much as possible, using the espresso machine as a physical barrier. Over those weeks, I memorized his look, the way his dark eyebrows contrasted with his sandy brown hair, which always looked greasy under the harsh fluorescent lights. He had a small scar above his left eye, shaped like a fish hook. His hands were rough, calloused, with dirt permanently lodged under his nails. He never wore a wedding ring, and I never saw a phone. On October 10th, I finally told Diane. We were taking inventory in the back room, and I tried to sound casual. "There's a guy who keeps coming in right before we close. It's kind of weird." She barely glanced up from her clipboard. "Is he bothering you? Like, saying anything inappropriate?" I paused. "No, but he just sits and watches me." Diane sighed, the way managers do when they think you're wasting their time. "Honey, we're a public business. As long as he's not harassing you or breaking any rules, there's nothing I can do. Maybe he just likes our coffee." I didn't bring it up again. The Thursday before Halloween, something changed. He arrived at his usual time, but instead of heading straight for the corner table, he walked up and stood right at the counter. I was refilling the sugar dispensers and almost dropped one when I realized he was directly in front of me. "Can I help you?" My voice came out much shakier than I intended. He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering the question. Then he said, "You work alone a lot." It wasn't a question, but a simple statement. My heart began to pound, but I forced that practiced, fake customer service smile. "Sometimes. Can I get you anything else tonight?" He didn't answer immediately. He just kept looking at me with his pale blue eyes that blinked far too rarely. Finally, he said, "Black coffee." Even though he had already ordered and paid, I pointed to the cup in his hand and reminded him he already had his coffee. He looked down at the cup as if he'd forgotten it was there, then walked to his usual table without another word. I instantly pulled out my phone and started texting Jenna. He just said something really creepy. But I deleted it. What could I even say after that? He made an observation. He noticed I work by myself. Diane was right. He hadn't technically done anything wrong. That Saturday, October 26th, he didn't show up. For the first time in over a month, I closed the shop without him sitting in that corner, watching. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I kept looking at the door, expecting him to walk in any second. The anxiety of waiting for him was somehow worse than his presence. I texted Jenna, "Creepy coffee guy didn't come in tonight." She sent back a party emoji. Maybe he finally got the hint. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut that his absence meant something. When I locked up at 10:15 p.m. and walked to my car in the back parking lot, I was practically sprinting. Every shadow looked like him. Every noise made me spin around. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes before starting the engine, checking the back seat 3 times and making sure all the doors were locked. The drive home felt longer. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I'd see that green jacket following me. When I finally got home, Jenna was still up, watching reality TV in the living room. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed it off, said I was just tired, but that night I barely slept. I kept replaying the way he'd said, "You work alone a lot," and wondered what he intended by it. Halloween fell on a Thursday that year. I'd been dreading it. Thursday meant a closing shift, and a part of me knew he would be back. Diane had asked if I wanted to trade shifts since it was a holiday, but I said no. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to seem scared. Maybe I thought if I acted normal, everything would stay normal. The shop was busy during the day. Parents bringing kids in for hot cocoa. Teens grabbing lats before parties. But by 8:00 p.m., it had completely cleared out. The string of orange lights Diane had hung in the window looked more eerie than festive after the sun went down. I spent the next hour and a half in a state of high alert. The door chime made me jump every single time. At 9:30 p.m., I started my closing duties early, wiping tables, emptying the trash, beginning to break down the espresso machine. At 9:47 p.m. the door chimed. I looked up and there he was. Same green jacket, same baseball cap, but this time he was smiling. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind that makes you realize the person wearing it knows something you don't. He ordered his black coffee, paid with exact change, and went to the corner table. I tried to focus on closing, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling as I counted the register. I miscounted twice. Had to start over. At 9:55 p.m., my phone vibrated. A text from Jenna. "Happy Halloween. We're ordering pizza. Want us to save you some?" I started typing back, "Yes, please." But then I looked up, and he was staring directly at me. Not just looking, but staring with such intensity that my thumb froze over the screen. I put my phone down on the counter and walked to the back room, pretending I needed to grab something. I stayed there for about 2 minutes, trying to take a few deep breaths, telling myself I was overreacting. When I came back out, he was standing at the counter, not sitting at his table, standing right there, inches from where I'd left my phone. "We're closed," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He glanced at the wall clock. "It's only 9:57. He was right. I'd locked the door at 10:00 p.m. every other night. "I'm closing early tonight." I lied. "It's Halloween and all." He nodded slowly, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he said, "You dropped something." He pointed to the floor behind the counter. My phone. It was on the floor, screen side down. I know I had left it on the counter. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when I saw his shoes scuffed and stained work boots, positioned right at the edge of the counter on the employee side. He had come behind the counter. While I was in the back room, he had walked around and stood where only staff were permitted. The realization hit me like a splash of ice water. I stood up fast, phone clutched in my hand, and backed away toward the espresso machine. "You need to leave," I said. This time, my voice definitely shook. "Now." He held up both hands in a mock gesture of surrender, that same unsettling smile still on his face. Just trying to help. He walked back around the counter slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact the entire time. When he reached the door, he stopped and turned back. Same time next week. My throat had completely dried up. I managed to nod, even though every instinct was screaming at me to refuse, to tell him never to come back. But I was terrified of what he might do if I provoked him. He left, and I immediately locked the door behind him, flipping the deadbolt with shaking fingers. I watched through the window as he walked toward the parking lot. But instead of leaving, he just stood there under the street light, facing the shop, watching me watch him. I grabbed my phone and opened my messages. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely type. I started writing to Jenna, "He's here again." But then I stopped, "He's here again." Those 3 words felt wrong on the screen, totally inadequate for the terror I was feeling. I deleted them and tried again. "That guy from the coffee shop came behind the counter tonight. He moved my phone. I think he..." But I couldn't finish the sentence. I think he what? I think he's dangerous. I think he's planning something. I had no concrete proof, just this overwhelming sense of dread that had been building for weeks. I stood there with my phone in my hand, the cursor blinking, trying to find the right words. Through the window, I could still see him in the parking lot. He hadn't moved. He wasn't even pretending to walk to a car, just standing there, hands in his pockets, staring at the shop, staring at me. I made a decision. I deleted what I'd written and typed something new. "He's here again." Short, simple, something Jenna would understand meant I needed help. But before I could hit send, the lights went out. Not just in the shop, the streetlights too. The whole block had gone dark. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged, in the sudden silence. The only light came from my phone screen, casting a pale glow on my face. And in that glow, I could see through the window that he was gone. The spot where he'd been standing was empty. My first instinct was to dial 911, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. They hovered over the numbers while my brain raced through possibilities. A power outage, completely normal for coastal Maine in late October. Wind knocks down a transformer. Whole neighborhoods go dark, happens all the time. But the timing felt too perfect, too deliberate. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it across the shop. Everything looked normal. Empty tables, clean counters, the Halloween decorations casting strange shadows on the walls. Then I heard it, a soft knock on the back door. 3 taps, evenly spaced. My whole body went rigid. The back door led to the alley where we took out trash and received deliveries. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to be back there at 10:00 p.m. on Halloween night. No reason except one. The knock came again, 3 taps. Patient. Like whoever was out there had all the time in the world and knew I was listening. I should have called the police right then. Should have hit those 3 numbers and waited for help, but instead, I found myself walking toward the back of the shop, my phone's flashlight guiding the way. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some part of me needed to confirm what I already knew. Maybe I thought if I could just see him, identify him clearly, I'd have concrete proof to report. I reached the back door and stood there, my hand on the deadbolt. The cold metal felt sharp under my palm. I could hear breathing on the other side. Slow, steady breaths that matched the rhythm of those knocks. Then a voice, muffled through the door, but unmistakable. "I know you're there." It was him. It had to be. But the voice sounded different than it did inside the shop. Less controlled, more excited. "Open the door," he said. "We need to talk." Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get out the front and sprint to my car. But my car was in the back lot. To get to it, I'd have to go outside eventually, and he'd be waiting. The front door led to Harbor Street, which would be mostly empty. I'd be running in the dark with no idea where he was or if he had a car. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. A text from Jenna. "You on your way home?" The screen light illuminated my face, and I realized with rising horror that it probably illuminated the gap under the door too. He could see the light. He knew exactly where I was standing. "I just want to talk," he said again, and this time I heard something else in his voice: impatience. The doorknob started to turn. Slowly at first. Testing. The deadbolt held, but watching that knob rotate made something inside me snap into action. I backed away from the door, typing as fast as I could. "He's here again. Back door. Call police now." I hit send and immediately dialed 911. My hands were finally working again. Adrenaline overriding the fear. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I whispered everything. The man, the weeks of watching, the power outage, the back door. She told me to stay on the line, that officers were 3 minutes away. 3 minutes felt like a lifetime. The doorknob had stopped turning, but I could still hear him out there, moving around. Footsteps in the gravel. Then silence. The worst kind of silence, where you don't know if the danger has passed or if it's just repositioning. I moved to the front of the shop, keeping my back to the wall, phone pressed to my ear. The dispatcher kept talking, asking questions to keep me calm, but I barely heard her. I was focused on every sound, every shadow. Then I saw flashlight beams cutting through the darkness outside, not from the street, but from the alley. Multiple beams moving fast. Voices shouting, "Police!" The relief that flooded through me was so intense, I actually slid down the wall and sat on the floor. The dispatcher told me the officers were securing the perimeter, that I should stay inside until they cleared the area. It took another 5 minutes before someone knocked on the front door. A proper knock this time, with a voice calling out, "Police, Mom, you're safe to open the door." They didn't find him. The officers searched the alley, the parking lot, the entire block. They found his coffee cup from earlier that night in the outside trash can. And they found something else. Fresh pry marks on the back door frame, like he'd been testing how easily it could be forced open. They also confirmed my phone had somehow sent that message to Jenna, even though I'd never hit send on the unsent draft. The officer said, "Sometimes phones glitch under stress. Messages get sent accidentally." But I remember deleting what I'd written and starting over. I remember the cursor blinking on "He's here again" with nothing following it. The police filed a report, took my statement, and checked the security camera footage. The camera showed everything I described: him coming in, standing at the counter, me going to the back room, him walking behind the counter. But when the power went out, the camera went out too. They saw him leave through the front door, saw him standing in the parking lot, and then nothing, just static and darkness for the next 11 minutes until the power came back on. No footage of him at the back door. No evidence he'd even gone around the building. They told me I did the right thing by calling. They patrolled the area extra that night, and the next few nights. Diane finally agreed to schedule 2 people for closing shifts. I quit 3 weeks later anyway. I still don't know who he was. The police never identified him from the footage. Never got any hits when they ran his description through their system. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever really planning to hurt me, or if he just liked the fear, if he got off on watching someone slowly unravel. I moved back to Augusta after that. I got a job at a bookstore that closes at 6:00 p.m. I don't work nights anymore. I don't work alone. And I never ever ignore my gut when someone makes me uncomfortable. Because the scariest thing wasn't what he did. It was realizing how close I came to unlocking that door. Nobody believes me when I say I don't remember most of that night. The police didn't believe me. My parents didn't believe me. And the psychiatrist they forced me to see certainly dismissed my story. But here's the thing: I have the photos to prove at least part of what happened, and my car was found exactly where I left it. So, something definitely went down in those woods outside Spokane. October 2022 was meant to be my big break as a photographer. I'd finally mustered the courage to quit my job at a tech support call center in August, right after my 27th birthday. And my parents gave me some savings from their house sale to keep me afloat while I built my portfolio. When I wasn't chasing freelance gigs, I was out shooting forests, abandoned buildings, anything that looked visually interesting. That Friday afternoon I found a forum post about Riverside Forest Preserve, a spot about 40 minutes northeast of the city. People claimed it had incredible fall colors and almost zero foot traffic. The photos they shared looked unreal. Golden aspens mixed with dark pines, and trails cutting through terrain that would look like something out of a fantasy film. I loaded up my Subaru around 7:30 p.m., throwing my camera bag and tripod into the passenger seat, along with a backpack containing water and an extra lens. The preserve wasn't hardcore wilderness. It was managed by the Forest Service with marked trails, but it was far enough out that casual hikers skipped it. I pulled into the gravel parking lot at 4:15 p.m., and the place was completely empty. Just my car sitting by a weathered wooden sign showing the trail map. 3 loops, ranging from 2 to 6 miles, all cutting through thick woods with a few ridgeline sections that looked perfect for my needs. The sun was already sinking, painting everything in that thick, golden light that makes every photo look expensive. I figured I had maybe 2 hours before it got too dark. I grabbed my gear, locked the car, pocketed my keys, and headed down the main trail into the trees. The temperature was dropping fast, probably in the mid-40s, and the woods smelled of cold air mixing with decaying leaves and pine sap. Everything was quiet, except for my boots crunching on the path. The trail started wide and well kept, but after maybe 10 minutes of walking, it narrowed down to barely a deer path. I passed a few smaller trails, branching off into thicker brush, but I stayed on the main route, because the map showed it led to a ridge with great sightlines. My camera was already out of the bag, hanging around my neck. Because I kept seeing compositions, I wanted to grab light filtering through the pine branches, clusters of bright orange mushrooms on a rotting log. The whole point was to find one or two truly solid spots and set up my tripod for some long exposure shots once the light softened. About half a mile in, I found what I was looking for. The trail opened up where the ridge began, giving me an elevated view over a section of forest that dropped down into a small valley. The aspens mixed with evergreens created these patches of brilliant yellow against the dark green. I could instantly visualize the shots, slightly underexposed to make the colors pop, shooting in RAW so I could work the highlights later. Perfect. I spent about 15 minutes scouting that ridge, checking different angles and waiting for the light to hit just right. The sun was getting low, maybe 45 minutes from setting completely, and the shadows were stretching long and dramatic across the forest floor below. That's when I set up my tripod about 10 feet back from the edge of the ridge, right where the trail curved. I mounted my camera, framed a shot looking down the trail as it vanished into the valley, and started making adjustments. The process was automatic. By then checked the level, stabilized the legs, dial in my settings. I took a few test shots, checking the screen to confirm the exposure, and everything looked good. But here's the unsettling part, and I didn't notice it at the time. When I reviewed those photos later, zooming in and truly examining them, you could see something in the background. Way down the trail, maybe 100 yards into the trees, there was a shape that didn't belong. It wasn't obvious. I wouldn't have caught it if I wasn't specifically looking, but it was there, like someone standing perfectly still behind a cluster of thin tree trunks, barely visible. At the time, though, I saw nothing. I was focused on the light, on the composition, on getting the settings right before the light disappeared. I kept shooting for another 20 minutes, moving the tripod to different positions. The woods were absolutely silent, except for a bird call echoing from somewhere deeper in the preserve. No wind, no rustling, nothing. That kind of silence where you become hyper, aware of your own breathing, and every small sound you make seems too loud. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have the entire place to myself. Around 5:15 p.m., the light was fading into the blue hour, and I decided to pack it in. I'd gotten what I came for, about 50 shots that included a few definite keepers. I collapsed my tripod, packed my camera into the bag, and took one last look at the valley below. That's when I heard it. Not a loud noise, just a faint crack, like someone stepping on a branch. It came from down the trail, the direction I'd been photographing toward. I turned and stared into the trees, waiting for a deer or another hiker, but nothing appeared. The forest went completely silent again, that thick quiet pressing in from all sides. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just listening and watching. The light was dim enough now that the shadows between the trees had turned into solid patches of darkness, making it hard to see more than 50 feet down the path. I called out, "Hello." I felt stupid doing it, but I needed to know if someone was there. No response, just my voice swallowed up by the trees, and then nothing. I told myself it was an animal, something moving through the underbrush off the trail. But I knew what deer sounded like. They make multiple sounds. This was one single crack, deliberate and sharp, like someone putting their full weight on a stick. I shook it off and started walking back the way I'd come, following the trail toward the parking lot. My camera bag felt heavier now, the straps digging into my shoulders, and I was suddenly very aware of the temperature drop. My breath was visible in the air, little clouds puffing out with each exhale. I walked faster than normal, not jogging, but moving with purpose, just wanting to get back before it was completely dark. The trail, that had seemed peaceful an hour ago, now felt different, claustrophobic. Even though it was the same path, the trees seemed closer somehow, the shadows deeper. About halfway back I heard it again, another crack, same sound, but this time it was closer and definitely behind me. I stopped immediately, spinning around to look back down the trail. Nothing. Just the darkening path disappearing into the trees. My heart was hammering now. That primitive part of your brain was screaming that something was wrong, even without seeing an actual threat. I waited, straining to hear any follow-up sound. Silence. Complete and total silence. I started walking again, faster now, my boots hitting the trail hard. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. The rational part of my brain kept trying to calm me down. You're alone in the woods at dusk. You're psyching yourself out. There's nothing here. But that voice was getting quieter with every step. Another sound, and this time I knew I wasn't imagining it. Footsteps. Not animal sounds. Not random falling branches. Actual human footsteps moving through the forest parallel to the trail. I could hear them clearly now, matching my pace, staying maybe 20 or 30 yards to my right in the thicker woods where I couldn't see through the trees. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I started again, slower this time. The footsteps resumed, maintaining that same distance. My throat felt tight, and my mouth was completely dry. Someone was out there pacing me, staying just out of sight in the darkening woods. I resisted the urge to call out. Some instinct told me that making noise would be the wrong move. Instead, I kept walking faster and faster, until I was essentially jogging down the trail. The footsteps kept pace, too, crashing through the brush now, no longer trying to be subtle. They were running parallel to me, matching my speed, and I realized with absolute certainty that whoever it was could see me, but I couldn't see them. The trailhead was just ahead, maybe 100 yards away, the opening in the trees where it met the gravel lot. My car would be right there. Safety. I broke into an actual run, my camera bag bouncing against my back. The footsteps in the woods sped up too, not rushing, just matching me exactly. Like whoever it was knew, they didn't need to hurry because they knew where I was going. The parking lot was the only way out. I burst out into the lot, gasping for air, my lungs burning from the cold. My Subaru was exactly where I'd left it, sitting alone in the gravel lot that was now almost completely dark. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers numb and clumsy. And that's when I realized the footsteps had stopped. The woods behind me were silent again. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see if someone was standing at the tree line watching me. I got my keys out, hit the unlock button, and heard the beep and the flash of the lights. I yanked open the driver's door and practically threw myself inside, immediately hitting the lock button. The sound of all 4 doors locking simultaneously was the most comforting sound I'd ever heard. I sat there, breathing hard, staring at the steering wheel while my hands shook. The dome light was on, giving me a small bubble of visibility, and I could see my pale, sweaty face in the rearview mirror. I needed to start the car, but I couldn't make myself put the key in the ignition yet. I was trying to process what happened, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But I knew that wasn't true. That's when I saw the movement in my passenger side mirror, just a flicker, something shifting position near the tree line about 40 feet behind my car. My entire body went rigid. I stared at the mirror, not daring to turn around. And then I saw it again, definitely a person, standing just inside the shadow of the trees. They were tall, wearing dark clothes that blended with the forest, and they were completely still, facing my car. I couldn't make out any features in the darkness. They were just standing there, watching. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I jammed the key into the ignition with shaking hands and turned it. The engine started immediately, and I threw the car into reverse, desperate to move. I backed up maybe 10 feet before slamming on the brakes and shifting into drive. In that brief moment when my reverse lights lit up the area behind me, I saw them clearly. They'd moved. They were closer now, perhaps 20 feet from where my car had been parked, standing in the middle of the gravel lot. Still not moving, still just watching. The reverse lights went off as I shifted gears, and the figure disappeared back into the darkness. I floored the accelerator, spitting gravel everywhere, and tore out of that parking lot like something was chasing me. I don't remember the drive home. I know that sounds insane, but I have absolutely zero memory of the 40-minute trip back to my apartment. The next thing I clearly remember is sitting in my living room with all the lights on, still wearing my jacket, my camera bag on the floor. My phone said it was almost 8:00 p.m., which meant I'd lost about an hour and a half somewhere. I chalked it up to shock. My brain on autopilot, but it still bothers me. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm down. Eventually, I pulled out my camera to look at the photos. Maybe there was something in them. I uploaded the SD card and started going through the images. The early shots looked normal. But then I got to the later photos, the ones I'd taken from the ridge right before I packed up. I zoomed in on one of them, and that's when I saw it. Way down the trail in the background, barely visible, there was a person standing there, motionless, facing the camera, facing me. I checked every photo from that location. They were in 4 of them, always in the same spot, always perfectly still. In 2 of the images, it was just a dark vertical shape, but in the other 2, where the light was slightly different, you could see it was definitely a human figure. They were too far away to make out any details, but they were there. This person had been there the entire time I was shooting, just standing motionless in the trees, and I never saw them. I felt sick looking at the photos. I grabbed my phone and called 911, telling them everything. The footsteps, the figure in the parking lot, the person in my photos. 2 officers came to my apartment about 45 minutes later. They were professional, but I could tell they thought I was overreacting. The next morning, I got a call from the sheriff's department that made everything so much worse. They'd sent officers to check the preserve at first light, and they found my car in the parking lot. My car? The same Subaru I'd driven home and parked outside my apartment building. The one I was staring at through my window while talking to the detective on the phone. Except it wasn't the same car. Mine was here, but there was a blue 2004 Subaru Outback with my exact license plate sitting in that gravel lot. Driver's door wide open, keys in the ignition, and my tripod still set up at the trailhead, facing the woods. They ran the plates. They checked the VN. Everything matched. The detective asked me carefully if I was absolutely certain I'd driven home. I told him to look outside my building. My car was right there. They eventually figured it out. Someone had cloned my license plates. Same year, same color Subaru. It's apparently more common than you'd think, usually for minor offenses. But this person had driven their cloned car to the preserve after I left, parked it in the exact same spot, and staged it to look like I'd never made it out of those woods. Door open, keys in the ignition, gear set up, like I'd vanished mid-shoot. The police theory was that whoever followed me in the forest had intended to do something, rob me, attack me worse. But I'd gotten away, so they went to Plan B's eye, making it look like something terrible had happened to me in the woods. They never found who did it. No prints on the abandoned car, no cameras in the area, nothing. The case just died. But I know what I saw. I know someone stalked me through those woods. Someone who had already gone to the effort of cloning my plates and planning something elaborate and deeply disturbing. I haven't been back to any forest preserve since then. I can't bring myself to shoot anywhere isolated. And sometimes when I'm looking through old photos, I'll see those images from that day, and I'll zoom in on that figure standing in the trees. And I'll wonder if they're still out there, watching someone else, waiting in the woods with a camera and a stolen car and God knows what else. That's what keeps me up at night. Not what happened, but what was supposed to happen if I hadn't run fast enough. October in Kentucky gets dark early, and that particular evening in 2016 was no exception. I'd been babysitting for the Andersons for about 6 months by then. They lived 40 minutes outside Lexington on this old tobacco farm that had been converted into a regular house sometime in the 80s. The property sat on 12 acres of mostly empty fields, with the nearest neighbor a good half-mile down the gravel road. I remember driving out that night, watching the sun vanish behind the tree line as my beat-up Corolla struggled up the unpaved driveway. The Andersons had 2 kids, Chloe, who had just turned 7, and her little brother, Noah, who was 4. They were sweet kids, never gave me any trouble, and always went to bed on time. Their parents were attending a medical conference in Louisville. Dr. Anderson was a pediatrician, and his wife, Nancy, was a nurse at the same hospital. The house itself was one of those sprawling ranch-style places with windows everywhere, floor to ceiling in the living room, big bay windows in the kitchen, and standard windows in every bedroom. Nancy Anderson loved natural light. She'd told me once she couldn't stand feeling boxed in. That night, though, with the darkness pressing against all that glass, I wished there were fewer ways to see outside. Or, more accurately, fewer ways for someone outside to see in. The kids and I ate dinner around 6:30 p.m. Teen mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs, Noah's constant request. We played some board games afterward, mostly Candyland, and I got them into their pajamas by 8:00. While they brushed their teeth, I noticed the motion sensor light by the garage kept flicking on. Probably deer, I figured. The Andersons had mentioned deer often came through the property to eat from their garden. But the light would click on, stay bright for its programmed 30 seconds, go dark for maybe a minute, then flash on again, like something was walking back and forth out there, just beyond my line of sight. Around 8:30 p.m., after both kids were tucked into bed, I settled onto the living room couch with my sociology textbook. I was finishing my degree at Eastern Kentucky University, with just 1 semester left. The house was quiet except for the dishwasher humming in the kitchen and the occasional creak old houses make. I'd been reading for maybe 20 minutes when I heard it. 3 distinct knocks on the dining room window. It wasn't frantic or aggressive, just 3 measured taps, like someone politely trying to get your attention. I looked up from my book, staring at the dark glass, but I couldn't see anything beyond my own reflection in the lamplight. The motion light by the garage wasn't on anymore. I waited, listening, telling myself it was probably a tree branch. The Andersons had a big oak that grew close to that side of the house. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. I went back to reading, though I kept losing my place in the same paragraph about social stratification. Then came 3 knocks on the kitchen window. Same rhythm, same pressure, like knuckles against glass. The kitchen was on the opposite side of the house from the dining room. No trees on that side, just open fields stretching toward the woods. I got up slowly, leaving my textbook on the couch, and walked to the kitchen doorway. The overhead light was off. I'd only left the small light above the stove on. Through the window above the sink, blackness, just my own ghostly reflection staring back. The knocking came again, this time on the living room window, the huge floor-to-ceiling one. 3 taps, deliberate, patient. Whatever was doing this was circling the house. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. But what would I say? Someone's knocking on the windows. They'd think I was paranoid. The Andersons lived so far out that kids playing pranks seemed unlikely. But the alternative made my chest tight with a fear I didn't want to name. I decided to check on the kids first. Climbing the stairs as quietly as possible, I peeked into Noah's room, then Chloe's. Both were sound asleep. Noah sprawled out like a starfish with his dinosaur stuffed animal, Chloe curled up under her purple comforter. Their peaceful breathing should have calmed me, but instead, it made me feel more responsible, more alone. As I stood in the hallway between their rooms, the knocking started again, this time on the window at the end of the hall, right behind me. 3 taps. Then immediately after, 3 taps on Noah's bedroom window, then Chloe's. Whoever was outside knew exactly where we all were, knew the layout of the house. My mouth went dry. I hurried back downstairs, grabbing the landline phone from the kitchen counter. The Andersons had one because cell service was spotty out here. As I picked up the receiver, I saw something that made me stop breathing for a second. There was condensation on the outside of the kitchen window, like someone had been standing there, breathing against the glass. The knocking suddenly became rapid, urgent, moving from window to window so fast it seemed impossible for one person. Kitchen, living room, dining room, back door, garage door, all around the house in a frantic circle. Not 3 polite taps anymore, but demanding pounds that rattled the frames. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I told the dispatcher someone was trying to break in. She kept me on the line, said deputies were on their way, and told me to lock myself and the kids in a bathroom. But before I could move, everything stopped. Complete silence. No knocking, no footsteps outside. Even the dishwasher had finished its cycle. The dispatcher was still talking, but I barely heard her. Something about the sudden quiet felt worse than all that knocking. Through the kitchen window, I could see the motion light by the garage click on again. This time, illuminated in its harsh white glow, I saw someone standing at the very edge of its range. They weren't moving, just standing there facing the house, too far away to make out features, but close enough that I could tell they were tall, wearing something dark, maybe a coat or a long jacket. The figure raised one arm and waved at me. Slow, deliberate, like we were old friends meeting across a parking lot. Then they turned and walked backward into the darkness, keeping their face toward the house the entire time, until the black swallowed them completely. The motion light clicked off. I told the dispatcher what I'd seen, and she said to get the children and lock ourselves in the bathroom now. But as I turned toward the stairs, I heard the front door handle jiggling. Not aggressive, just testing, seeing if it was locked. It was. I'd checked it twice already. The handle stopped moving. Then I heard the same sound at the back door, testing the side door by the garage. Testing every exterior door one after another, like they were making sure I'd secured everything. My legs felt weak as I forced myself up the stairs. I grabbed Noah first, his small body heavy with sleep, then rushed to Chloe's room. She stirred when I picked her up, mumbling something about a bad dream. I carried them both into the master bathroom, locked the door, and set them down in the bathtub with some towels as cushions. Chloe woke up more fully then, confused and scared by my behavior. I told her we were playing a game, like hide and seek, but we had to be very quiet. Noah stayed asleep, curled against his sister. The dispatcher whispered that deputies were 8 minutes out. 8 minutes feels like hours when you're hiding in a bathroom with 2 kids, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of glass sliding, The Andersons had this old sliding window in the laundry room that didn't lock properly. Nancy had mentioned getting it fixed, but hadn't gotten around to it yet. The window was small, but an adult could squeeze through. I heard something hit the laundry room floor. A soft thud like feet landing. Footsteps, slow and careful, moved through the house. Not rushing, just walking like they had all the time in the world. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I held my breath, gently pulling Chloe closer, my hand over her mouth to keep her from speaking. The first stair creaked, then the second. Whoever was in the house was coming upstairs. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and paused. Through the gap under the bathroom door, I could see a shadow blocking the hallway light. They were standing right outside, not moving, not trying the handle, just standing there breathing. I could actually hear them breathing deep, steady breaths, like they were trying to calm themselves down, or maybe savoring the moment. The dispatcher was whispering that deputies were 3 minutes away, but her voice sounded tiny and distant through the phone pressed against my ear. Then the person outside spoke, and it was worse than any scream or threat could have been. A normal voice, conversational, almost friendly. "I know you're in there with them." I knocked first. That was me being polite. The voice belonged to a woman, maybe middle-aged, with a slight rural Kentucky accent. "You shouldn't have called anyone. Now it's all messed up. The timing. The way it was supposed to happen." She sighed like she was genuinely disappointed. "I've been watching this house for months. Learned their schedules when they'd need a babysitter. You're earlier than usual tonight. That wasn't part of the plan." My mind raced, trying to place the voice, but I'd never heard it before. She kept talking through the door, calm as if we were chatting over coffee. "The Andersons don't know me, but I know them. Know that Nancy leaves that laundry room window unlocked. Know that Dr. Husband of hers keeps cash in his office downstairs, hidden in that ugly ceramic vase. Know those kids' names, their bedtimes, their favorite snacks." She tapped on the door just once, gentle. "See, I used to live in this house 20 years ago, before the bank took it. Before my whole life fell apart in these rooms. My daughter's nursery was where little Noah sleeps now. Painted it yellow myself, though they've covered it with that blue. Coming back here, walking through at night when everyone's sleeping, it's the only time it feels like home again." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you had to go and ruin it. Had to be awake. Had to see me. Had to make those calls. Now they'll arrest me, and I'll never get to walk through my house again." The shadow under the door shifted, and I heard her slide down to sit against the wall. The message on the window was for next time, but there won't be a next time now, will there? Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The woman stood up quickly. "They're here faster than I thought they'd be." Her footsteps moved away from the bathroom door, back toward the stairs. "You take good care of those babies. They sleep so peaceful, don't they? I never meant any harm. Just wanted to walk through my old life sometimes. Remember when things made sense." I heard her going down the stairs, not rushing, but not dawdling either. The front door opened. She must have unlocked it from the inside. Through the small bathroom window, I could see red and blue lights flashing across the trees. The dispatcher was telling me to stay put until deputies cleared the house, but I was focused on listening to what was happening downstairs. Car doors slammed, shouts. The woman's voice tired now. "I'm not armed. I used to live here, that's all. I just wanted to come home." There was a scuffle, commands to get on the ground, the metallic click of handcuffs. Chloe was crying quietly, and I held her tighter, Noah finally stirring in the tub. 2 deputies eventually came upstairs, announced themselves, and told us it was safe. Later, after the kids were back in their beds, and I'd given my statement 4 different times, one of the older deputies told me her name was Judith Brennan. She lost the house in 2007 after her husband died and left behind massive medical debt. Her daughter had passed away from leukemia in what was now Noah's room. She'd been breaking into the house for almost a year, always when the family was gone, never taking anything, just walking through the rooms. The Andersons had noticed small things. Furniture slightly moved, windows they thought they'd locked found unlocked, but assumed they were misremembering. Tonight was different because she knew they'd hired a babysitter. She thought I'd fall asleep on the couch, like apparently the girl before me used to do. When I stayed awake, when I noticed her, she panicked and tried to scare me into leaving. The message she traced on the kitchen window, while I was hiding upstairs, "Don't open the door again," wasn't a threat. According to her, it was advice. She didn't want anyone else letting strangers into what she still considered her home. The Andersons came back that night, cutting their conference short. They moved 2 months later. I never babysat there again, but sometimes I drive past that house and wonder if Judith still watches it from somewhere in the darkness, waiting to go home. My student loans had just hit 5 figures when I downloaded the Rideshare app that October. I'd been staring at my laptop in my cramped studio apartment near the University of Oklahoma, doing the math for the 100th time, trying to figure out how to stretch my work-study paycheck from the campus bookstore to cover rent, food, and gas for my 2009 Honda Accord. The solution was obvious. I needed another income stream. My cousin drove for one of those apps in Dallas and claimed she made decent money on weekends, especially late nights when surge pricing kicked in. I figured Norman had enough bars and enough students without cars that I could make it work. Plus, the Accord had just passed inspection. The interior was clean enough, and I'd always been good with directions, even before GPS made it foolproof. 6 weeks into this side gig, I developed a routine Thursday through Saturday nights, from 10 p.m. until around 2 a.m., sometimes later if the money was flowing. That Friday night had been steady but unremarkable. I'd already made 4 trips by the time midnight rolled around: 2 sorority girls heading to Bricktown, an older gentleman who needed a ride home from his hospital shift, a group of grad students bar hopping on Campus Corner, and a very drunk guy who spent the entire ride showing me pictures of his German Shepherd. My earnings were sitting at about $70 after gas, which meant I could actually buy something besides instant noodles that week. I was parked in a McDonald's lot, scrolling through my phone and debating whether to call it a night, when the app chimed with another ride request. The pickup location made me pause. It was way out by the abandoned warehouses near the Canadian River, at least 15 minutes from where I was sitting, but the estimated fare was $28, and the destination just said, River area. Vague, but not unusual. Sometimes people put in general areas and gave specific directions once you picked them up. The drive out there took me through parts of Norman I usually avoided after dark. The streetlights grew fewer and farther between as I headed south, following the GPS through neighborhoods where half the houses had plywood over the windows and cars sat on blocks in front yards. My headlights swept across empty lots full of tall grass and the occasional tipped-over shopping cart. The radio started picking up more static than music, so I switched it off and drove in silence, except for the GPS occasional, continue straight. When I finally reached the pickup spot, it was just a gravel pull off next to a rusted gate that had probably once led to some kind of factory. A single streetlight about 50 yards away cast a weak orange glow that made everything look sickly. I couldn't see anyone at first, and I was about to cancel the ride and get out of there when a figure stepped out from behind a concrete barrier near the fence. The man who approached my car moved with this weird, deliberate slowness, like he was being careful about each step. He wore a long wool coat that looked expensive, but old-fashioned, the kind with a high collar that businessmen wore in those black and white movies my grandmother used to watch. His face was hard to make out in the dim light, but I could see he was clean shaven with dark hair, combed straight back with what looked like too much product. When he opened the back door and slid in, the dome light illuminated him for just a second. Pale skin, maybe mid-40s, with these deep-set eyes that didn't quite meet mine in the rearview mirror. "Good evening," he said, and his voice had this formal quality to it, like someone who'd learned English from old textbooks. "I need to go to the old houses near the river, the historic ones." I asked him for a specific address, explaining that I needed something for the GPS, but he just waved his hand dismissively. "Just drive toward the river. I'll tell you when we're close." I started driving, heading east toward where I knew the Canadian River curved through town. The app was showing an error message when I tried to input the destination, just spinning endlessly, so I had to rely on his directions. Every few minutes, he'd lean forward slightly and tell me to turn left or right, always in that same measured tone. Left at the stop sign, right after the yellow house. Straight through this intersection. What made my chest tighten was that each turn took us through neighborhoods I knew well. First past the elementary school where I'd tutored kids for community service credits, then by the park where my study group sometimes met on sunny days. We were heading toward the older residential areas on the east side where professors and longtime residents lived in those big Victorian-style houses with wraparound porches. The closer we got to my own neighborhood, the more I kept checking the mirrors, watching him sit perfectly still in the back seat, his hands folded in his lap, like he was in church. After about 10 minutes of this guided tour through increasingly familiar streets, I couldn't ignore it anymore. we were definitely heading toward my apartment complex. Not just the general area, but taking the exact road I drove home every night. When we passed the convenience store where I bought milk every Sunday, only 3 blocks from my building, I finally spoke up. "Hey, these old houses by the river, can you be more specific? Because we're getting pretty far from the Canadian River now." He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window at the passing houses. Then, in that same calm voice, he said, "Rivers change course over time. The old maps show different paths." That response made absolutely no sense, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to pull over and tell him to get out. But we were so close to my neighborhood that I worried he might already know where I lived, and I didn't want to escalate things while we were alone on a dark street. When we turned onto Sycamore Avenue, my street, I made a split-second decision to drive past my apartment building and keep going toward the actual historic district another mile east. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. I watched him in the rearview mirror, trying to see if he was looking at the buildings we passed, if he was checking the numbers, if he recognized where we were. But he just sat there with this blank expression, occasionally glancing down at something in his lap. That's when I noticed he had a piece of paper folded into a small square that he kept turning over in his fingers. "The house with the blue trim," he suddenly said, and my whole body went rigid. My apartment building had blue trim around the windows. It was one of the reasons I'd chosen it, because it reminded me of my parents' house back in Tulsa. "What house with blue trim?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are several around here." He leaned forward then, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something sharp and medicinal, like old aftershave mixed with hospital disinfectant. "You know which one?" he said quietly. I slammed on the brakes right there in the middle of the street, not caring anymore about being polite or professional. My finger was already on the emergency button on my phone that would call 911, and I turned around to face him directly. "Get out of my car right now. The ride is over." But when I turned around, the back seat was empty. The door on the passenger side was hanging wide open, the interior light illuminating the worn fabric seats. But he was gone. Not walking away, not running down the street, just gone. I sat there for maybe 5 seconds, too stunned to move, before scrambling to check that all my doors were locked. That's when I saw it. The piece of paper he'd been holding, now unfolded and sitting on the middle of the back seat. With shaking fingers, I reached back and grabbed it. It was an old map, the kind from a gas station, probably from the 80s based on the faded colors and style. Someone had drawn a red circle around a specific spot, and when I looked closer, my entire body went cold. It was my apartment building, not just the street or the block, but the exact building with my unit number written in small, neat handwriting next to it, apartment 237. I drove straight to the police station, not even thinking about going home. The map was clutched in my hand the entire time, wrinkled from my sweaty grip. The officer at the front desk, a tired-looking woman with graying hair pulled back in a bun, listened to my story with the kind of patient expression that told me she'd heard stranger things. She took the map, put it in an evidence bag, and had me fill out a report. When I showed her the ride request on my phone app, though her expression changed, there was no record of the pickup, no ride history, no payment pending, nothing. According to the app, my last ride had been the drunk guy with the German Shepherd photos, completed at 12:47 a.m. It was now 20:15 a.m., and according to my phone, I'd somehow lost over an hour. The officer suggested maybe the app had glitched. Maybe someone had tried to request a ride, and it hadn't gone through properly, but we both knew that didn't explain the map or how he knew my address. They sent a patrol car to follow me home and check my apartment before I went inside. The 2 officers, both younger guys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, walked through each room while I waited in the hallway. They checked the closets, looked behind the shower curtain, even opened the kitchen cabinets for some reason. "All clear," one of them told me, handing back my keys. "Make sure you lock up tight. Maybe put a chair under the doorknob if it makes you feel better." After they left, I did exactly that. Chair under the doorknob, kitchen knife on my nightstand, every light in the apartment blazing. I didn't sleep that night, just sat on my couch watching the door and jumping at every sound from the hallway. Around sunrise, I finally started to doze off when I heard something that made me bolt upright, the distinct sound of paper sliding under my door. I crept over, knife in hand, and saw it. Another folded piece of paper. This time it was a receipt from a hardware store, dated that morning, 6:23 a.m. Someone had purchased a single item, a copy of a key. The billing address at the bottom was mine, and the last 4 digits of the credit card matched my own. I called 911 immediately, my voice cracking as I explained about the receipt. While I waited for the police to arrive again, I called my credit card company from my laptop, hands trembling as I typed in my account information. There it was, a pending charge from Hartman's Hardware, time-stamped exactly as the receipt showed. The woman on the phone assured me they would reverse the charge and flag it as fraud, but that didn't explain how someone had my card information or why they wanted me to know they'd copied a key. When the police arrived this time, it was a different officer, an older man named Officer Briggs, who actually seemed to take me seriously. He bagged the receipt and called for a locksmith to come change all my locks immediately on the department's dime. While we waited for the locksmith, he sat with me in my living room and asked detailed questions about the man from the ride, writing everything down in a small notebook. "Has anyone been following you lately? Any weird encounters at work or school? Ex-boyfriends, rejected guys from dating apps, anything like that?" I told him no to everything, but then remembered something that made my breath catch in my throat. About 3 weeks earlier, I'd given a ride to another passenger late at night, a younger guy who'd been completely silent the entire trip, except for one comment. When we'd passed my neighborhood, I'd noticed because we took the same exit off the highway. He'd said, "Nice area, safe, good for young women living alone." I'd thought it was a creepy thing to say, but figured he was just making awkward small talk. Now, I wondered if he'd been fishing for information, if maybe he'd watched me drive home after dropping him off. Officer Briggs wrote it all down and promised they'd pull security footage from the hardware store, check traffic cameras from that night, do everything they could. The locksmith arrived and spent 2 hours replacing every lock, even adding a deadbolt to my bedroom door at my request. For the next 3 days, I stayed with my cousin in Oklahoma City, too scared to be alone in my apartment. When I finally went back, Officer Briggs called with an update. They'd found the man on the hardware store security footage, tall wool coat, same description I'd given, but his face was always turned away from the cameras, like he knew exactly where each one was positioned. The credit card fraud department traced the breach to a skimmer that had been found on an ATM near campus, one I'd used the week before. As for the man himself, he'd paid cash at the hardware store and left no other trail. I quit driving for the Rideshare app that same day, deleted it from my phone without even cashing out my final earnings. The money wasn't worth it anymore. I broke my lease 2 weeks later, taking the financial hit to move in with 3 other girls from my economics class, who needed a 4th roommate for a house near campus. My new room was on the 2nd floor with a window that faced the backyard, no street access, and I made sure to vary my route home every day, never falling into a pattern. For months afterward, I'd wake up at night thinking I heard paper sliding under my door, but it was always just the wind or the house settling. Officer Briggs checked in with me periodically for about 6 months, always asking if I'd noticed anyone following me or if anything else strange had happened. Nothing ever did. The man with the wool coat never tried to contact me again. Never showed up at my new place. Just vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared in my back seat that night. Sometimes I wonder if he got what he wanted just to scare me, to prove he could find me, to show me how vulnerable I was driving strangers around in the dark. The strangest part came almost a year later when I was cleaning out my old backpack to donate it. In one of the inner pockets, I found another piece of that same old map folded into a tiny square. This piece showed a different part of Norman, an area I'd never been to, with another red circle drawn around what looked like an empty lot near the river. I gave it to Officer Briggs, who had it tested for fingerprints, but like everything else connected to that night, it led nowhere. He mentioned that they'd had 2 other reports from rideshare drivers about similar incidents. Passengers who knew too much, who gave directions to the driver's own neighborhoods, who disappeared, leaving behind cryptic messages or items. None of the cases were ever solved, and the police theorized it might be someone with a fascination for scaring young women, someone who studied their routines through the apps and credit card records. They increased patrols around the areas where drivers typically waited for rides and sent out warnings through the rideshare companies. But as far as I know, they never caught anyone. I still have nightmares sometimes about that cologne smell, that measured voice saying, "You know which one?" And the way he just vanished from my back seat. I work at a call center now, boring, but safe, and I take the bus everywhere, even though I still have my Honda. Some nights when I'm walking home from the bus stop, I catch myself looking back, checking if anyone's following, wondering if somewhere out there he's still requesting rides, still studying his maps, still leaving his calling cards for other terrified drivers to find.